Yo everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the GeekWave. This is the low budget show. The show so low, I just touched the mic, that this show has no budget. It's the show so low, it has no budget. The low budget show, you know? We're so low. Solo, a Star Wars story, an underrated masterpiece of the Disney Star Wars era, in my humble opinion. Solo, a Star Wars story. That is not what we're here to talk about this week. Today, we are talking about a celebration 100 years in the making because one of the oldest studios in all of Hollywood. Is it the oldest? I can't remember. They're doing like their first big push. Maybe Paramount or Columbia did it like before, but they don't really exist in like the big scale as Warner Brothers. It doesn't matter. Warner Brothers, the day this goes live, they have been 100 years old or just about to be 100. Kind of cool. Kind of cool, if you ask my opinion. Love that. Love things that just exist and have so much like history and infidelity behind them. I think that's awesome. But before we do jump into the wonderful world of the Warner Brothers backlot, where we're going to hang out with Yakko, Wacko, and Dot, as they give us a guided tour for all of this, we're going to look at a couple news pieces. And there was a couple that dropped the day we're recording this. A couple of things worth talking about. Let's get into it. The first thing we have to talk about is Miller World, which was a huge push on Netflix. They did one thing called Jupiter's Legacy, which I think is one of the best deconstructions of the modern superhero trope on television ever. I really think Jupiter's Legacy is a great show. Well, it bombed, and they let a lot of the contracts ride out for that show, but they're doing another Miller World project. It's called The Chosen One. This is an adaptation of American Jesus, which is like the big Jesus story. I feel like every type of one of those creators, like that genre of just kind of like edgy, different, has their take on religion, you know. Even Kirkman has like his battle pope, and I get it. You know, Garth Ennis has preacher. Everybody has their version of like, what if religion wasn't all it was cracked up to be, and there was like a broken mirror, like glass looking at us, and I'm like, I don't give a shit, man. But you know what? I do want Miller to succeed. I feel like making the deal with Netflix has not been what it's been cracked up to be for him. And that kind of sucks, but I'll give this a chance. I do think American Jesus was a fine book. It was never like my go-to of his work. But I get it. I completely understand why you would do that. I don't know if the track record for Netflix is going to make this important. I would have held out and maybe hopefully got a better deal of Amazon, you know? That's just me. That's kind of like a smaller piece of news we can touch on too for a minute. Joe Quesada has kind of been hired by Amazon to like spearhead a comic book department of sorts. Cool. That's going to be fun. I like that. But American Jesus on Netflix, okay. I guess we'll see how it goes. It's called The Chosen One, which I wonder, because there's that like crowdfunded like series that's like 3 seasons in called The Chosen. And if I'm not mistaken, because I do have that app, they changed their name, right? Did they change their name? I can't remember. I'm going to go into the app now. This is like the actual story, like from the Bible, like a biblically accurate depiction of all of that stuff. They have a show called The Chosen. Wow, I gotta watch a lot more of it. Okay, I feel like that's going to be a topic for another day, but Angel Studios is the company. They have like 3 seasons of The Chosen, so I thought like maybe they had to like change the name to compete against this Chosen One show, but I guess they don't. They don't really have to compete. That is just easy for them. Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, so if you guys haven't seen The Chosen, I, of course, haven't watched all of it, but if you want to get a sense of what this is, it's like a crowdfunded show that depicts I think it's the history of Jesus and all that. It's crowdfunded, so you can like pledge money to do it. It's like actually based on like the Bible and stuff, and it has over 500 million views, and the counter goes up every second, so that's impressive. Talking about that more than I'm talking about American Jesus. Doesn't matter. Next topic. Ryan Coogler will be developing and producing an X-Files reboot. That's right, folks. Let no property die. I guess X-Files was X-Files like a Fox property, so it's kind of like pulled over into the new umbrella of Disney? Interesting. Coogler does have a bigger deal with Disney at the moment, so I guess this is kind of part of it. I don't understand why he would choose this property. It's a very specific property that I don't know there's a bunch of like audience for, but I get it. I don't know. Maybe today's climate is just not conditioned to want to see the X-Files. Like, I feel like the vibe of the X-Files is like there's a mystery afoot, but we also live in like a generation where like every single like paranormal encounter or like found footage thing, whatever, is just uploaded to like YouTube and TikTok, and it's just blasted everywhere. So you don't really get that vibe today. Like, I don't know. I don't think like a conspiracy show about like there's something larger between the government and an alien autopsy works in 2023. That doesn't feel like it has its audience that can hold it together. But who knows? I could be completely off base. Maybe that does work. I just don't see it happening. But Coogler is a smart choice for this. Like, he knows how to make characters interesting. I just can't understand why he'd want this to be his thing. It doesn't matter. Cool. That's going to be exciting to see. I'm always down for more X-Files. That is a universe that is worth exploring. If it's a fresh reboot and a retelling, I guess you could kind of modernize that up for a 2023 audience, but I don't know how you would do that. I don't know how you can take like the premise of like Mulder and Scully like having to solve these conspiracies and like go against the authorities of the worlds and everything to figure this out when everything is just posted online today. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to see if they could pull off a modern X-Files. I don't know if they can, but I'm all for it. Do anything. Everything deserves a chance to shine. Like this show, My Adventures of Superman, one of those animated projects announced in the last regime of Warner Brothers. It was kind of under the Caped Crusader umbrella. They went to Amazon. Well, My Adventures of Superman will be moving to That's right, folks. Adult Swim. Makes sense, you know, they got the Harley Quinn show streaming in some places, so that's kind of cool. I'm down for it. I think that's going to be really cool. It could be a good alternative to the Harley Quinn show, so that's going to be very exciting. I'll talk more about that series when it comes out. That might be one we talk about weekly. I'm all for this. This type of stuff, I love to see it. I think it's a really cool idea. Can't wait to see more. Cannot wait to see more. Speaking of things that are very compelling, Scott Pilgrim is going to be getting another adaptation, this time an animated anime format on Netflix with the cast of the original movie. And I'm like, why? Why? I don't get this. I do think there is like a certain generation that has Scott Pilgrim versus the World as one of those influential like film pieces where it's like, it's brilliant, the cast is brilliant, the way it plays with itself is brilliant. I've seen it like maybe twice, once in theaters when I was a young man, and I'm just like, yeah, this is cool. I do like what we're doing here. The film's kind of whatever, but I guess if you take like the style of like the manga and you do that style, I can understand why you would want to do that in like an animated format. I just can't believe the entire cast is just like, yes, we are all loyal to Scott Pilgrim for some reason. I don't understand the Scott Pilgrim loyalty. I don't get it. Maybe there's something there I don't understand, but whatever. More Scott Pilgrim, I guess, can't hurt. Like, I don't know if it's like a harmful series where people are like, ugh, this ruins my life. It seems like it just exists in its own bubble and has no impact on anything. So I can't complain about that happening. I can't. It feels like we're going to be fine with it or without it, you know? It's one of those things that means nothing and will eventually just fade into obscurity like all Netflix productions do. But that's fantastic. Is Edgar Wright attached to it? He might be producing in some capacity because he was tweeting about it. He was like, we're doing it, folks. We got everybody's back. Yeah, they're all coming back. Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Kieran Culkin, the other guys. Mae Whitman. Was it Mae Whitman? Was she in that? Maybe. Who are the other ones? Brie Larson. I think she was talking about it. Anna Kendrick, I don't think she'll be, I don't know. It's all dumb. Brandon Routh was one of them, I think. I don't know. None of it matters. We'll see if anybody watches it. But this is the news I really wanted to talk about, because this is very exciting to me. Clint Eastwood, the 93-year-old filmmaker who is still actively developing movies. He released one like 2 years ago. Nobody saw it, but Cry Macho came out like 2 years ago. He is supposedly working on his last movie. Clint Eastwood, at 93 years old, is going to be directing and releasing his final film, which is supposedly called Juror Number 2. It's said to be a thriller focusing on a juror in a murder trial who realizes that he may have been the cause of the victim's death. While grappling with this dilemma, the juror has to decide whether or not to manipulate the jury to save himself or eventually reveal the truth and turn himself in. Now, it doesn't say if this is based on a true story, but Eastwood has a couple of those like true stories under his belt that he just loves to talk about. He's a fun guy. I love Clint Eastwood. Just like, look at this elderly man just getting to do whatever he wants because a long time ago somebody said he was the thing. I love this. I'm one of those people that firmly believes Clint Eastwood's going to live past 100. He's going to keep kicking. He's never going to go away. Clint Eastwood's going to make it to 120, and he's going to be making movies until then. He's going to keep going. You know, last week Tarantino said, I'm making my last movie. Well, Clint Eastwood is literally like 40 years older than the guy, and he's like, you know what? I'm not done. I'm making this. They say it's my final film, but it won't be. I have too much integrity. I'm going to die on a movie set. I'm Clint Eastwood. All of you suck. Watch me just whip out a Cry Macho or a Richard Jewell or a Mule within the next 12 years of my life. I love him. Good for you, Clint. Just be a old man being an old man, making old man movies for no one in particular but yourself. I hope you star in this movie, and I hope you are juror number 2, because that would be epic. I love that, man. That would be so cool. Do it. Just fucking do it. Let's see what you got, Clint. Let's see what you got. I'm all for it, dude. Let's rock and roll. Let's have a good time. Switching topics a little bit, we have to talk about a couple of trailers that came out. The first one being the official trailer for Secret Invasion, the new MCU adjacent TV series. Yeah, it's a TV series coming to Disney Plus. Probably 6 episodes, I have to imagine. It looks good, which is surprising because all those other shows have pretty much been bad. Cool. I mean, I've been burned before, so I don't want to get my hopes up too much for this show, but a dark conspiracy with like the underbelly of the Marvel Universe, and we see that, Nick Fury has to deal with it. That's kind of exciting. I do like that premise. We've also been burned before with these TV productions, so I'm not going to be like, oh man, I can't wait to see what's going on here. The tone for the trailer looks very strong, but then again, the tone for the trailer for things like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and Moon Knight were also really strong, and then those turned out to be, just kind of whatever. So I hope it's good. I do like this cast a lot. Olivia Colman's always fun. Emilia Clarke is always fun. I do like seeing Sam Jackson having a good time, and he's committed to whatever he does, and I respect the hell out of him for that. Way to go, dude. You are kicking ass and looking great. I love that. I love that for him. But we also have, premiering literally minutes before we're recording, is the trailer for the Blue Beetle movie, the holdover that was supposed to be an HBO Max original film, getting a theatrical run, which is a smart idea, a genius idea. This film is Jaime Reyes, and he is headed out into the world. He's working at this weird corporation, and they're like, hey, hold this box for me while we get indicted or something. And he takes a box home. His whole family sees it, including George Lopez, who is in this movie, and that surprised me. I wasn't expecting some Lopez in here. Cool, I guess, if you're a Lopez fan. I ask you this question, folks, and I'm genuinely asking this question. If you are under the age of 20, do you have any idea or knowledge of who George Lopez is? I'm just asking. Nothing against the guy, except for the things I am against him for. Interesting. Suit looks good. We do actually see the suits for, what's the original one's name? Garrett something. I can't remember. You do see the original Beetle suits. Cords is there. Ted Cords is there. And the other guys is there too. It looks fun. It looks fun. I have nothing bad to say about this trailer. It looks like an actual fun genre piece from the DC universe where the actors look committed. There's a real story behind it. It does kind of feel a little obscure and not interesting, but I can't say I won't see it. I'm more excited for this than I was for Shazam or The Flash or Aquaman. So, you did something right. You got the Cobra Kai kid, Zulo, and you're going to do something good with him. So that's cool. I like it. I like all of this. Good stuff. That's all for the news, folks. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Warner Brothers as they are today and before today, like yesterday, but 100 years from today. Yeah. April 4th is the day after this video will release, or this podcast episode, I should say. And with that, we are going to be celebrating 100 years of Warner Brothers Studios Entertainment, the biggest show in movies, folks. Isn't it weird to think there was a time when this is all we had? Crazy. 1923. Set the stage, folks. So we have had like a recirculation of like nostalgia for that era. You know, Babylon was a big movie looking at that like era and those films and everything. And I'm reading a book called Hollywood, the Oral History, which talks a lot about that. It's just so cool to me that like the same studios have been around for that long. Sure, some of them have been like, you know, dismantled and went bankrupt and no longer exist, but like there's so many from like that original run of that era that are still fairly independent, going strong. You know, Paramount is one of them, Universal is one of them, Columbia kind of has a branch of Sony now, which is interesting. RKO no longer exists, which makes sense, because why would it exist? MGM is fiercely independent, but is also kind of like connected to Amazon now. That's just the way of the world. You know, things just connect and disband and everything kind of falls apart. But Warner Brothers was another one of those ones that was fiercely independent for a long time. Arguably the biggest right next to MGM was Warner Brothers. They had like a strong case of like, we're good at this. We did a lot of innovative stuff that's kind of like changed the game, did so many unique things. That's really cool to see. I think there is something important about the history of film that is worth talking about, and it does kind of start with a lot of the stuff that Warner Brothers did. I think one of the most like important things they did, we'll get to that in a minute here because it's like not one of like their earliest spots. Well, you just gotta like be impressed as like, hey, a couple of bros just said, Mom, we're gonna go make movies with our money, gonna produce shit. And they did. And that's kind of cool, but we'll talk about it for a second, because I think, like, aside from being, like, one of the biggest studios, having the most money, having, like, the right talent and getting people on your side, and you had some of the biggest stars at the time, and you just knew exactly what you were doing, like, in that early era, when you were formed in 23, you already had, like, a repertoire to you. It's kind of just, like, we were making smaller pictures then, some silent pictures that didn't really go anywhere. But then when we became a studio in 23, we really hit the ground running, and we suddenly became like the biggest thing. Of course, I think a lot of like the other brothers are kind of forgotten, but I think anybody who knows anything about like the history of film or just like recognizes like the importance of it is aware of Jack Warner. He is one of the most infamous guys out there, you know? You know him, you revere him. He is an important figure through history. You also have like Harry Warner, Sam Warner, and Albert Warner, who are just the other guys, just the other ones that are there. But Jack became infamous for like the way he's like just quietly telling you what to do, quietly controlling things, sometimes outlandish. He's a really interesting guy. I don't know how much like we want to get into that today, but he is a very key figure in this, becoming one of the top producers, one of the top creators, one of the top guys in Hollywood, maybe ever. I mean, there are names today that could take those places. Like you could compare it to maybe something like Zaslav, but even Zaslav just doesn't have like that romance to him. Warner was just like an abrasive, talking hard, loud-mouthed guy who could say things and maybe not say things, just in his own lane, could do things, and people respected him for that. They didn't like him all the time, but they respected him for that. And I think there's something very compelling about that narrative. I do I am somebody who has read a lot of stories, a lot of books, has seen a lot of like information about old Hollywood. I do like that era, and 23 is like a weird time for like Hollywood because it's kind of like in its transitional period to slowly approaching a more studio-driven thing. The early days, you just had your friends, you just went to shoot shit, and you released it somewhere. No major studios. There was a couple, you know. Again, I just think like because Warner Bros. Is one of the most prominent brands today, they are going to do a big push to celebrate their 100 years. And that's kind of interesting. But, sometimes you just gotta be like, yeah, history is weird. And I know there's like a huge reverence for like old movies and that kind of stuff, but a lot of them are just forgotten to time and not stuff you talk about. So I am looking at a list here on IMDb. Now, I don't know how accurate this is. It was last updated in 2019, but this is a list of Warner Brothers films released from 1918 to 1999, and there are a lot of movies in this list. We're going to go through it as best we can, not talk about every single one, but I think what I want to do is kind of just like celebrate the history of Warner Brothers a little bit, look at like their key moments and like the things they did. Now, these are from 1918, where Warner Brothers was still like an operating studio, but not like the studio it is today. They were just kind of like a release house. You would like release things. The Warner Bros., they would help you finance, help you produce, help you sell your, like 70-minute quiet, silent picture. There wasn't anything like truly captivating about a lot of that. Just stuff that happens. I think the tie that binds was one of like their bigger pushes, and that's fine. Like in that era, everyone just kind of like shot shit and did whatever. None of it really like presented it anyway. It's weird. If you do ever have like the chance to look back at some of these older films, there is always something to see and explore in that. Warner Brothers did release a couple of interesting things there. Now, I think like we see Brass is like their first one kind of maybe like released in the 1923. I'm not positive on how accurate this is, but that's kind of a cool thing to see. It's just exciting. Like they really pushed a lot of stuff. It's still in that silent era where things are just kind of like, whatever, weird shit is a brewing. Some of it's fine, some of it isn't. But during like this time period, kind of like between, I would say like 18 to 28, that time range is fairly similar in the terms of like what the studio is doing and what each company is doing. It's kind of all interspersed, and there's nothing like truly independent about any of it. The Age of Innocence, I guess, is one of the other bigger ones. Maybe, like this era, looking at this list, there's just things being released. They push a lot of movies out every year. Some of them are fine. Some of them just don't really have any powerful impact. And, it's okay. It's one of those things where if you are alive in that era, you are going to have a more interesting feel for all of this. It's going to matter to you more. If you're not, I get it. Some of these movies just are forgotten to time. Like everyone's made a Don Juan film. Like that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any impact for any of it. And it just kind of exists. And you do got to live with that. You get it? Kind of cool. Is it kind of cool? I guess so. I don't know. And I'm trying to see where it appears on this list. But I guess we could talk about it till I actually like reach it on this list I'm going through. There are a lot of titles. Again, Old San Francisco, Jaws of Steel, One Round Hogan, The First Auto, A Sailor's Sweetheart. That is where we're going to get to the film I really want to talk about, which is a 1927 release. A very important film, one of the most important films. Now, it might not be the first film to be in this style, but it's the most important because it made it something viable for audiences, and that is Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. Now, we have to talk about The Jazz Singer looking at the history of film, because this was like the first major film to be a talkie. This is where it's like we have a theatrical movie where people are talking and singing and the sound is coming out from the picture. It all connects back to The Jazz Singer. It is a very important film through like the annals of history. But again, it might not be the first to do it. It is the first commercial success to do that. And that's the kind of thing that was like a huge risk at the time. You didn't know if that was going to pay off, if it was going to work anywhere. But the fact that it did, it is one of those films that changed what Hollywood would become. It changed the way we view cinema. It changed the way we think about movies. Now there was another level we had to get to, and that is because Warner Brothers took this risk. And isn't that amazing to think about? Just 4 years after the company is founded, they take a risk like this. crazy. It's crazy to think about. But Jazz Singer, it is one of those movies that always plays on like TCM or one of those classic stations. If you haven't seen it, it is an important film to watch if you are a fan of film history. It is a really cool movie, really interesting. Maybe it doesn't hold up perfectly well for like, a younger generation, but it is something that is cool, and it's a very important film. Very important film, and it changed the world. And I know that's like such a big thing to say. Like, what kind of a statement is that a film changed the world? I just think it's amazing that a movie from Warner Brothers, even that early on in Warner Brothers' conception, mattered so much, because Warner Brothers just doesn't have the vibe of a studio today that's going to take chances. And they released Noah's Ark, which is, big biblical picture. Zanuck, again, one of those guys that became infamous with Warner Brothers. You like that? Warner Brothers also had Michael Curtis, which is a big name. We'll talk about him later. No doubt about that. Zanuck is another one of those guys throughout history that kind of like was infamous and known. He was one of the guys that everybody went to. A very prominent figure in this era of Hollywood. I like this era. Again, it's not the best era. As we get like further into the things, it is an important era, but the more we get down the list, we're going to like slowly start seeing a history emerging here. Now, again, we're in like the 29 era. There's not much special about this. It's just kind of like we're taking chances on creators. A lot of Michael Curtis pictures. We like them a lot. Alan Crosland, another big name that always makes some movies. And it's just cool, seeing like some of these names. It's very exciting. You do like it. Like, this era is important, but it's not one I don't think a lot of people really go back to it that much. It's just kind of like, well, the real era when things pick up is when we start talking about the war, and we're going to get to that. Don't worry. Aviator, cool, fun movie, I suppose. A lot of stuff in here, again, lost to the annals of time. I don't know if anybody has seen Loose Ankles, The Other Tomorrow, She Couldn't Say No, 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 Nanette. Well, maybe people have seen No, No, Nanette. That's kind of a known one. I don't know. Interesting stuff. Like, it's important to talk about these films. They could be forgotten, though, and it doesn't really matter. They're not going to change the way we view anything or think about film, and that's fine. But Warner Brothers just making movies forever. You gotta respect it. You gotta respect it. Like, hey, we'll just pump out 1 billion pieces of cinema, and you can just accept that we maybe know what we're doing. That is exciting. Have you guys seen Feud, Betty and Joan? That talks a lot about like a later on era of Warner Brothers, where again an older Jack Warner is dealing with shit. That's kind of exciting. More in this era of the 30s is some Michael Curtis pictures. And okay, I'm trying to see here. Is there anything really worth talking about in the 30s? Kinda, I guess. Not much. And that's okay. A lot of this video is going to be stalling as we go through everything about this. Because this era, again, like this era is kind of just, we're making movies in this style and everyone's doing it. This is where 31, they released the first Maltese Falcon, which is, it got better. It got better. Maltese Falcon became a better property after that first one from 31, which is fine, Interesting movie. Maltese Falcon holds up incredibly well if you haven't seen that. Like, I guess we could kind of talk about that now too, because I don't know how long it's going to take till the name appears in these like videos that we're looking at here. They really did a lot with Bogey. Bogey was like their guy for a very long time, and he was kind of just like an important figure to talk about. I'm a big Bogey guy. My favorite movie of all time, Casablanca, Bogey's biggest picture and one of the best things he ever worked on. Huge fan of Bogey. I'm just going to skip through a little bit more because there's not much here to look at in the 30s. Nothing really. Like, you get it. You know how this era is like. Every movie kind of is interchangeable. Nothing really creative to talk about. But hey, it's kind of fun. Interesting stuff to look at nonetheless. And you get it. So let's see here. What is worth talking about in the late 30s? Not much, really. A lot of romance stuff. Again, so many of these movies, they're just like, who really cares? I would dare any child under the age of 18 to sit down, look at this entire list, and pick one movie in the 30s to watch. Let's see. Back in circulation? Probably not. The Life of Emile Zola? Probably not. They Won't Forget? They Will Forget. Trust me, nobody remembers. Alcatraz Island? That's kind of a fun title. I like that. Submarine D1. Everyone, let's watch the latest Lloyd Bacon picture. Pat O'Brien's in it, and I like Pat O'Brien. He's a fun guy. The Octopus. That sounds sick as hell. I'm going to watch that one. The Patient in Room 18. Who has seen that? Raise your hand if you've seen The Patient in Room 18. We're kind of hitting like that stride now where this studio is like, hey, guess what? War is bad, because we have Errol Flynn's huge film with Olivia de Havilland, who died very recently. Olivia de Havilland lived to be old. Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, kind of like marks the next big thing. One of the biggest swashbuckling films ever. I think this film holds up incredibly well still. It's one of those amazing things for like the history books of Warner Bros. That they made a really good Robin Hood movie. And it looked great, and the colors were so fantastic in that movie. It looks incredible. One of the best looking movies, I think, of the era. It's one of those ones that they just put like a huge push for, and it holds up incredibly well. Is it the best Robin Hood? That might be a topic for another day that we'll get into. I think it is in the top 3 Robin Hood films ever made. It might be my favorite Robin Hood. There might be some better movies with the character in it, but I think Errol Flynn is like my quintessential Robin Hood story. Warner Brothers also did a lot with like the Nancy Drew character. Not that any of those movies are memorable, and you don't really think about Nancy Drew in like this era, but she existed in this era, so that's something to talk about. We are still seeing Dr. X. There's an important figure through history. There's some more Bogey. Bogey showing up, doing some cool stuff. You love Bogey. Bogey's the best. We're going to start seeing more Bogey pop up in here. I like seeing that. Cagney's showing up a little bit too. A couple of Karloffs, but, Karloff, more Universal guy. And maybe before we talk about Universal, we'll have more fun, because I think Universal made a little bit more interesting choices in this era and later eras. Look, Warner Brothers kind of is that studio that's just like the safe bet in this era. They're going to release whatever comes to mind. It's going to be fine. No one's really going to overly think about it or have any opinion on it. Kind of boring. I am really dragging this out a lot because I thought there'd be more hits in this era, but I guess not. Nothing really stands out of this discourse. I get it though. Nothing really worth talking about. It's okay. We've reached the 40s, folks. We have Bogies, Maltese Falcon with John Huston directing. I'm a huge Huston fan. I think he's one of those directors of the era that is really good. The fact that they made Maltese Falcon is kind of cool. We also have The Man Who Came to Dinner, which is a Bette Davis yarn, and it is really well done. A strong movie, a great movie of that era, kind of perfect, kind of amazing. A lot of good stuff. Again, we are in that war era. Things are starting to pick up. Here's a big one with Michael Curtis and James Cagney, Yankee Doodle Dandy. I would hesitate to get any young person to watch that movie, but it would be so much fun to see somebody try to watch that. But here we go, folks. Let's talk about it for a minute. We have to talk about Bogey and Berman and Paul Henreid and Claude Rains in Casablanca. The greatest movie ever made. The best thing the most amazing thing about Casablanca is that it was just like a workaday movie where it's like, well, we have to make a war picture. Bogey wants to make a war picture. We have a couple of writers who wrote this really cool script, kind of an interesting love story, and it just ends up being one of the most important films of all time, one of the most interesting films of all time, and the type of movie that Warner Brothers desperately wants to try to make again. They desperately want to make another one like that. And they can't. And then we start seeing, Mildred Pierce starts to appear. That's kind of exciting. Again, we're starting to see some of the more regular players making their appearances, like Cagney and Gary Cooper sometimes will start showing up in this era. Peter Lorre will make a couple appearances. Olivia de Havilland, kind of like their underrated star who will appear when you need her to. I really like that about like this era where it's just kind of like, people work for the same studio, they can make good movies, or sometimes they don't. Like The Big Sleep, one of my favorite films ever made too. My favorite director of all time is Howard Hawks. I think Hawks is an incredible director who has made nothing but hits. I'm a huge fan of all of his work. The Big Sleep, one of the that is so fascinating to see. But the guy is just a workman. He will make any type of movie you want. You want a drama? Here it is. You want a Western? Here it is. You want a musical? Here it is. He just makes what he needs to. And it all looks good. It all unfolds in a beautiful manner. He is just so strong and does some cool stuff in that regard. I love seeing him. I love seeing all of his works. I don't know if The Big Sleep is like my favorite of the era, but it's pretty good. Key Largo, another big one for Bogey. Bogey was the guy of the era. I'm trying to like, who would be the modern Bogey if I had to like compare him to somebody? I don't know. Would you say maybe? I was going to say maybe like Harrison Ford, but that feels like even that's an earlier generation. Maybe Christian Bale, but Christian Bale, I would love to have seen Bogey play Gore the God Butcher, though. That would be fucking amazing. And we're still looking at some good movies here. Like, this is where they start to be like, oh, there's an art form to movies. We can actually make things that are compelling and have good narratives and stuff. Yeah. Kind of cool that can happen, isn't it? We're in the 1950s now, folks, and things are picking up. Strangers on a Train, an early Hitchcock movie. Did Hitchcock become one of their players? I don't know. In like the modern era, it was Nolan for a bit. Clint Eastwood became one of their guys until they like messed up Tenet and Nolan left. And now like the home for auteur filmmakers is kind of universal. Like they're kind of like taking everybody in the modern era. But even in like the early 2000s, I guess we'll talk about this sparingly throughout like the entire piece because we're kind of just going through a bunch of stuff. It is kind of compelling that like Warner Brothers used to be like, if you want to make a good movie, you can come here and pump it out, you know. Todd Phillips, you got something to make, shove it in over here, you could put it out somewhere. You know, it was cool for a minute, but now they don't really want to do that. They're all about like their big blockbusters, like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. Cool. I don't know, a lion is in the streets. Oh yeah, now we're talking Hondo, baby, Hondo. And then we got The Diamond Queen. Now we're talking these classic films. Dial M for Murder, an early one of their guys too, was Hitchcock, of course. Getting him is important. And in this era too, we're in the 50s now. We've went 30 years into the future. We still have Jack kind of like leading the charge on a lot of stuff. Them, one of my favorite movies, which is a bunch of giant ants that attack people. That shit is bussin', dude. An early Star is Born comes out at this release. That's exciting. East of Eden, James Dean suddenly making his face as one of the coolest guys in the world. That's cool to see. Rebel, same year, really fun. You kind of love him, right? The Searchers, there's John Wayne, everybody. John Wayne is making his appearance. Here we go. This is a really fun experiment. If you want to do something fun, just look at like the history of an entire studio and how they're escalating their stuff. It's pretty cool. There's Giant, the last James Dean flick. And we entered 1957, folks. It's very exciting. We're jumping around a little bit more just because, you get it. You know, Elia Kazan shows up, George Cukor shows up, whatever happened to Baby Jane becomes a big deal. The 60s are just like, we're entering a new era, you know? Like, we have My Fair Lady, one of like the last of that era, kind of. Things start to take a big shift as we get to the 70s. But you know that too. You got guys like Mike Nichols doing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and that's going to inspire a whole new generation of stuff. Things are changing. Warren Beatty shows up in Bonnie and Clyde, which is fine. Camelot. You get it. Cool Hand Luke. Again, we're slowly, quietly, with a brisk pace, entering into a new era. Entering into a new era of cinema. And that's cool. That's a video in itself. And there is an entire generation of writers and talents that could speak on it better than me as the new age of cinema rolling in, when we stopped being a studio system, when we moved towards what the 70s would look like. And we'd see how Warner Brothers would put up with all of that, like THX 1138, an early George Lucas film. That's a good fun time. You love it. There is a changing of tides on the horizon. So Kubrick releases a movie over here. One of his earlier pieces, A Clockwork Orange, which is fun. We see Here Comes Dirty Harry, which is an early Clint Eastwood movie, and the dude hasn't stopped working since. That's kind of fun. Changing tide, folks. Changing tides. We see a lot of interesting pictures starting to form in this era, and we're all here for it. things are starting to get more commercial now too. There's an entire generation that grew up on our movies, that grew up watching those classics that we just talked about, like William Friedkin, who is making The Exorcist, which is a fantastic film, really interesting and worth talking about. And Mel Brooks makes Blazing Saddles over here with us, and it's a fun time. And we're all enjoying everything we're doing here. We're having a great time. Black Christmas is a really underrated horror movie. Fun. The Towering Inferno, I should say. That's a creative one too. I do like that movie. I think it holds up well. Here is an old Doc Savage movie and a Wicker Man movie before we did another Wicker Man. Things are starting to branch out into more known brands, like a Cleopatra Jones movie. There was one a couple years before. You get it. Barry Lyndon. We have Kubrick for a little bit making some movies. That's kind of exciting. All the President's Men is fun. More Eastwood showing up. He's kind of taking the stage for a bit here. We're kind of leaving the era that would be the Hitchcockian stuff. We have The Exorcist as one of our main brands, but we don't have Friedkin back to direct the sequel. Kyle Rayner, I should say, doing a couple of things for us too over here. Interesting stuff all around. It feels like we're slowly reaching a new branch that is going to come with the tides. And just like the jazz singer before it, they release a movie in 1978 that is going to shape the language of Hollywood for an entire generation to come. That, of course, is Superman, the movie, the film next to Star Wars and Jaws that kind of changed the way we do things. Of course, this is like their big blockbuster. And, before that, Universal had theirs and, Fox had theirs. Changing tides, man. It's crazy. Superman is a very important movie. I know we look back on it kind of just like, hey, that's kind of cute, whatever, but it did have its importance. It did mean a lot when it came out, and it holds up well. I think that movie holds up better than most modern superhero flicks, or most superhero flicks in general. It's just an incredible picture and so fun. I really like that. Friday the 13th taking us into the 80s with The Shining as well. Now, again, bigger stuff going on here. Caddyshack being a big thing. Harold Ramis did a bit with them. It's fun. Like you just feel like there is a huge shift in culture and tone for these movies once we hit the 70s. We're making crazy shit, crazy stuff, and it all is just what people talk about today. Excalibur being one of those two. The sequels to Superman, of course. Arthur, a surprisingly good movie people do enjoy. Kind of fun to see that have its area of expertise. I like that. And this is where we kind of like stop being like a director's company, an actor's company. It's just like, if you want to like sell us your idea, we'll try to buy it. Like they released The Road Warrior for George Miller because the first one was very independent. Ridley Scott's Blade Runner becomes a big thing over here. Another one of those things they always want to cash in on, but they don't know how to do. Now, there is a key thing throughout this entire period that I haven't really touched on, and I think we'll get to it in a minute here, just as we kind of like, once we get to the 90s, I think we'll talk about it a little bit more. But we see, okay, here is a Tom Cruise flick. He will eventually become a Paramount bitch. I'm kidding. Cruise is amazing. I'm amazing. I'm just impressed he's doing what he's doing. Great to see him there. Police Academy, huge movie that people love. That entire generation obsessed with Police Academy. I don't get it. Joe Dante's Gremlins premieres here. Very exciting. Tightrope. Okay, that's kind of a fun one. Again, more of these like just interesting releases that are kind of just forgotten to time, but we just don't care. Like another Police Academy movie. There's like 7 of those things. I don't think any of them are interesting. We also still have Clint Eastwood working his way through here. We also have for a while, a couple movies. We have Tim Burton because 85 brings us Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which he will lead into another big tonal shift in Hollywood. As we get to it in a minute, we have, just some other crap. Nobody really cares. Stallone does a couple things over here. Not many. He'll just get around. That's Stallone. You put him in anything, it doesn't matter. Harrison Ford's Mosquito Coast, which is a fine movie. Little Shop of Horrors, which is a fantastic film. An incredibly well done movie. More Police Academy bullshit. George Miller, I guess, has good faith with them for a bit. Don't understand it. he will eventually just be self-independent again. It's kind of exciting. Spielberg has his Empire of the Sun. Good movie, I guess. Beetlejuice, again, hey? One of those characters that is owned by Warner Brothers that they want to do more with. I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago where they're like, what if we made a sequel to Beetlejuice? Wouldn't that be cool to see? Maybe, but is it? Is the question we have to ask ourselves. Probably not. Now, we are going to talk about once we get to the 90s, but there was a movie released called Daffy Duck's Quackbusters, which is like, a parody. You get it. You understand. We'll talk about the Looney Tunes when we get to it. Important for the history because that is like the thing that kind of separates them most from other studios is their animation department. But we have reached 1989, so we have to talk for a second about Tim Burton and Michael Keaton's Batman movie, another one of those films that said weird stuff from pulpy stories can become successful blockbusters. You just gotta let us play for a minute. Let them cook, let them cook. And they cooked, and the history was changed forever. Insane. We're in the era, again, we don't really got the Warner brothers doing anything now. New management is changing the way we do things, and it's crazy. Rodney Dangerfield still making movies for us for some reason. What was the Rover Dangerfield? Boy, I tell you, that's a funny movie, I tell you. Great stuff. Too many movies. Do we have too many movies? Is that possible? Spike Lee releases Malcolm X, which is fun. That's how Malcolm X should be described, as a fun movie. Ivan Reitman, a little bit of stuff going on over here. A little bit of creative forces. True Romance is out over here. It's fun, I guess. Cool stuff. We're slowly getting to the era that I think everybody who's listening is more familiar with. Ace Ventura, you get it, fun character, everybody likes him. I'm not a Jim Carrey fan, so I just don't give a shit. But Natural Born Killers from Oliver Stone becomes a big one, blah, blah, blah. And we just kind of get to like the modern era. Not really worth exploring anymore. Neil Jordan's Interview with the Vampire Chronicles, fucking dumb movie. The show that came out last year was way better. And I don't need to talk about any more of like that era. We'll talk about the big franchises now, and you get it. So we started off as like we're making random shit. We make the first huge talkie. We get a bunch of cool guys that hate the war. We make a bunch of movies until then. Hitchcock and Kubrick, two legendary directors, come with us. All through that, throughout the entire annals of that entire story, we have the Looney Tunes, which is our cartoon story with Bugs, Daffy, Porky, and the gang. They have been the triumphant figure throughout the entire history of Warner Brothers. Their defining feat is Bugs Bunny, I do think. There are so many books and videos online that you can watch and read about the history of Looney Tunes, and they're so interesting, but they are essentially just like these chaotic forces that have existed throughout time and space with everything that Warner Bros. Is doing. When they get more syndication, they release like hour-long specials and TV specials with the characters. They have theatrical release to movies. They are these things that existed for so long and are essentially like the best creation to come out of the Warner Bros. Library. And they're great. The Looney Tunes are great. It's a conversation for another day, and we will have that conversation. But they kind of usher in what is going to be Warner Bros.' biggest play, and that is blockbusters. Now, we kind of talked a little bit about Christopher Nolan and everything he did over there, his Dark Knight trilogy, his other huge releases of that era. He was kind of like their big guy for the independent blockbusters. But then you see they also owned the DC universe. They owned the Harry Potter universe. It kind of just became this insane thing that Warner Brothers wanted to compete with the big boys. And it's just not great sometimes, It's like, oh man, what are we doing here? And that's what the modern era is just. So you can kind of look at like some of the things they own. Middle Earth stuff, sure, why not? DC Comics, the Flintstones is a franchise, but the new Flintstones thing is going to that fucking Fox network. So what are we doing? Guys? The Lego movie, I guess, is theirs too. This is not helpful, WarnerBrothersFandom.com. None of this information is helpful. Do they have the distribution rights to Lord of the Rings? I can't remember. They do have Tom and Jerry. which I guess is important. It looks like they have Richie Rich too, so that's kind of okay, cool. The Matrix, that's a big one. The Matrix is a big one. The Monsterverse, but that's through Legendary, but they no longer work with Legendary. And they have Beetlejuice, Gremlins, Friday the 13th. Those are ones that you can use to compete with other stuff. Dirty Harry, is that a universe? We're not really doing anything with that. Willy Wonka, surprisingly. Now, this says Ninja Turtles, but that is now Paramount, so that's not true. Osmosis Jones, yeah, but like they're going to do anything with Osmosis Jones. The vacation stuff with National Lampoon, sure. We'll see. The Hangover movies, because they do have a deal with Todd Phillips for some reason. Todd Phillips is like a big name over there. Hard to understand why. He's made a couple movies that are good. And then The Joker. So that's strange. Oh, man. I don't get it. I don't really understand it, but it happens. And that takes us to the modern era of Warner Brothers. The other thing we have to discuss with this era of Warner Brothers is that they are a constantly shifting, like, tectonic plate that could erupt at any moment. Discovery owns them now, I should say. AT&T had them for a minute. They are just like, could you imagine 100 years ago if you took all of the Warner Brothers, brought them to the present day, and they saw what became of them? Do you think the very sight of Black Adam would kill them? Do you think maybe just the sight of Dwayne Johnson in that picture that I love so much of him in the boardroom watching Black Adam, do you think it would kill the Warner Brothers? I think so. I think he would kill them. It's awesome. It's awesome stuff. But there is a huge, rich history of Warner Brothers stuff. They are very important for the history of film. They have given us some great classic movies, some great classic franchises, and a lot of crap in between all of that. They have been a safe home for really cool directors and really cool actors. They are a growing brand that is looking to maintain their stronghold on cinema, even though it is slipping away. They are no longer the elite brand or elite studio they used to be. There was a huge shift, I would say probably in the 2000s, when we started to see that other studios and other brands are stronger and more popular. They do have other like relations and connections to stuff, whether cartoon networks and things like that, and Adult Swim, of course, but they're not the brand they used to be. 100 years of movies, 100 years of content, 100 years of a shifting plate, just changing the way we view things. Warner Brothers will exist forever. I don't think it's ever going to be a studio that officially, wholeheartedly goes away. It just might not be like the number one thing at the moment, and that's fine. That is fine. They have a huge history, and they had the deal of TCM, didn't they? Like TCM was part of like the HBO Max thing, but it's interesting, you know. They are trying to exist. They might not, but they're trying, and that's all we can say for sure. Is that they're doing their best. It's just not good enough, dude. Like, what are you doing? You know, you have Dune, and you have The Matrix, and I guess you have Mad Max and Nightmare, and like, what are we doing here, guys? Why is everything so bad? I don't know. It's all kind of shitty. Everything kind of sucks. But at least we know they helped Hawks make some good movies, like The Big Sleep, and that's fun. And Al Jolson's a jazz singer. That's fun. Movies are good. Movies are good. Warner Brothers is fine. They gave us Space Jam, and Space Jam: A New Legacy, so who's to say they are absolute shit? They're fine. Mediocrity will outshine anything you set your mind to. That's where we live, folks. That's where we live. Oh, it's great. A great time to be alive. We're all happy. And that is going to do it for this episode of the GeekWave. Thank you for celebrating Warner Bros. With me. It's just rambling, looking at a list of old movies and stuff. And what more do you want from my type of content? That's what I do best here. That's what I love. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. So have fun, stay safe, go to the movies and watch Shazam! Fury of the Gods, the biggest release for Warner Brothers since Black Adam. Ooh, good luck.